What would you do if, one morning, the sun was no longer as you knew it? Not if it vanished in an instant, but if it became a pale, milky disk, a powerless smudge of light in a permanently gray sky. How would you feel if the warmth of summer never arrived? Imagine the air, strangely cold in the middle of July, a damp chill that seeps into your bones and never leaves. The smell of wet earth and mold permeates everything, because the rain never truly stops. You hear the wind, whispering tales of an eternal winter, while the silence of the birds becomes deafening. The only light is a perpetual twilight that blurs the colors of the world and the faces of your loved ones. This is not an apocalyptic fantasy. For millions of people, this was the terrifying reality that began in the year 1257 and lasted for years. What you are about to hear is not the story of a volcano. It is the chronicle of daily life in a world without a sun. We will step inside the homes, the fields, and the minds of the people who survived the greatest climate catastrophe of the last millennium. To understand the magnitude of the blow, you must first see the world that was about to be struck. It was a planet at a boiling point, a mosaic of empires and kingdoms that believed themselves the center of the universe, completely oblivious to their own fragility. In the heart of Asia, the Mongol Empire of Mongke Khan was an unstoppable force. His horsemen, a torrent of steel and fury, were at their peak expansion, a colossus erasing borders and reshaping empires from the plains of China to the ancient lands of Persia. A nomadic world, in constant motion, forged in the harshness of the steppe. Further west, in the Middle East, the Islamic Golden Age, though politically fragmented, remained a beacon of knowledge. In the libraries of Baghdad and Damascus, scholars translated Greek philosophers, mapped the stars, and advanced medicine, preserving and expanding the wisdom of the ancient world. And then there was Europe, a continent of Christian kingdoms, locked into the rigid feudal system. In the England of King Henry III or the France of the devout Louis IX, the life of nearly everyone, from the humblest serf to the most powerful lord, depended on a single, sacred rhythm, the cycle of the harvests. The sun was the guarantor of life, the rain, the promise of bread. The Catholic Church was the power that gave meaning to the entire cosmos. Every storm, every drought, every unusual event in the sky was not a meteorological phenomenon, but a direct message from God, an omen, a trial, or, more often, a punishment. Far, far away from the Mongols, the caliphs, and the kings, in a corner of the world they did not even know existed, stood a mountain. On the island of Lombok in modern-day Indonesia, the majestic Semalis volcano dominated the landscape. At its feet flourished the prosperous kingdom of Lombok, whose capital, Pamitan, was a vibrant center of local trade and culture. Its people lived in harmony with the mountain, which they considered sacred, unaware that they were living on a geological time bomb. While the great empires played their games of power, an unimaginable force in a forgotten corner of the planet was about to change the rules of the game for everyone, equally. In the year 1257, one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in human history tore the island of Lombok apart, injecting an amount of sulfur and ash into the stratosphere that would change the global climate. Now, travel back in time. You are in Pamitan, on the slopes of Semalis. The ground, which has always been firm beneath your feet, begins to tremble. It is not a passing tremor, but a deep, growing convulsion, as if a giant were awakening beneath the soil. The cattle bellow in panic. The birds flee in silence. Then comes the sound, a roar that comes not from one direction, but from all directions at once. It is a thunder that pierces your body, drowning out screams and prayers. It is the sound of the mountain breaking in two. You look up and see the daytime sky turn black in a matter of minutes. This is not the darkness of night. It is an absolute opaque blackness, formed by a column of ash and rock rising 40 kilometers into the sky, erasing the sun, erasing the world. It begins to rain, but it is not water. It is small stones, pumice and ash that cover everything in a gray, suffocating blanket. And through that darkness, you see the true terror. Flows of superheated fire and gas, pyroclastic clouds, descending the slopes at hundreds of kilometers per hour, devouring forests, villages, and every trace of life in their path. It is the end of your world. For centuries, this catastrophe was merely an echo in an ancient manuscript. The Babad Lombok, A Javanese text written on palm leaves told the mythical story of a prosperous kingdom on the island, destroyed when the great mountain, Samalas, collapsed in on itself with fire and thunder. It seemed like a legend, one among many, but in the 21st century, science found the irrefutable proof. In the most remote places on the planet, in ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica, scientists found a fingerprint, a layer of abnormally dense sulfates, precisely dated to the year 1257, far greater than that of any other known eruption. Like geological detectives, they analyzed the chemical composition of these particles and traced their origin to a single suspect, a tropical volcano. The ancient myth and modern science converged on a single point on the map. The legend of the Babad Lombok was true. The immediate impact was total annihilation. The kingdom of Lombok, its capital Pamatan, its people, its temples, and its markets, all were buried under tens of meters of volcanic material. They became a forgotten Pompeii of Southeast Asia, wiped from the map and from history. Where an imposing mountain of over 4,000 meters once stood, now remained a scar on the earth, a vast caldera that, over time, filled with water, forming the peaceful lake we know today as Sagara Anak, a landscape of serene beauty that hides the memory of one of the greatest furies the planet has ever unleashed. The eruption of Samalas was not just an explosion. It was a massive injection of chemicals into the atmosphere that would change the rules of life on Earth. To understand how a mountain in Indonesia could starve a peasant in England, we must take a journey into the sky. When a volcano of this magnitude erupts, it doesn't just spew ash and lava, it launches millions of tons of gases, primarily sulfur dioxide, into the stratosphere, far above the clouds and the weather. Up there, this gas reacts with water vapor and transforms into tiny droplets, sulfuric acid aerosols. These particles are so light that they do not fall. They remain suspended, forming an invisible but incredibly effective veil. This veil acts as a gigantic planetary mirror. Sunlight reaching the Earth is reflected back into space before it can warm the surface. The result is a drastic and sudden global cooling. We call this phenomenon a volcanic winter. To give you a sense of scale, the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, famous for its spectacular sunsets around the world, was a Category 6 event on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. The 1991 eruption of Pinatubo, which cooled the planet for 2 years, was also a Category 6. The Samalas eruption in 1257 was a Category 7, 10 times more powerful. Within months, the stratospheric currents, those high-altitude rivers of wind, dispersed this aerosol veil across the entire globe. From the North Pole to the South Pole, an invisible yet relentless shroud began to envelop the planet, filtering the sun's light and setting the stage for a catastrophe that no one could explain. In the months following the eruption, the aerosol veil reached every corner of the planet. For the people of that time, who knew nothing of volcanoes in Indonesia or stratospheric chemistry, the sky simply fell ill without explanation. Imagine you are a monk in St. Albans Abbey, England. You spend your days copying manuscripts and recording the events of the kingdom. One day, you notice that the sun seems to be in a perpetual eclipse. Even at midday, its light is weak, pale, unable to cast sharp shadows. You note in your chronicle that the Star King seems to have lost its strength. Now you are an astronomer in Baghdad. Your life is to observe the heavens, to predict the movements of the planets. But the moon has become strange. Its glow is milky. Its outlines diffuse as if you were looking at it through a fogged glass. Your calculations become imprecise, your observations confused. Now you are a peasant in northern France. It is spring, the time to plow the earth, but an unnatural cold refuses to leave. Frost covers the fields in the morning, and the ground is hard and frozen. You feel a chill that is not normal for the season, a premonition that something is terribly wrong. In different parts of the world, chroniclers of the era left testimony of their bewilderment. The English monk Matthew Paris was one of the most eloquent. In his writings on the year 1258, he describes a grim and terrifying London. The sun lost its light, the weather was inclement, with incessant rains and storms that destroyed the fruits of the earth. Other chroniclers, from Italy to Poland, described strange dry fogs that never dissipated and a persistent smell of sulfur in the air, which many described as a foul stench, the breath of hell. They did not know they were smelling the remains of a mountain that had exploded on the other side of the world. The psychological impact was devastating. Initial confusion gave way to a deep fear and then to widespread religious panic. If the sun, moon, and stars, the pillars of divine order, were failing, it could only mean one thing: the end of times was near. Apocalyptic preachers and groups of flagellants began to roam Europe, whipping their backs in public and proclaiming the final judgment. People scanned the sky for an answer that would not come, feeling watched and judged by an angry and implacable God. The world had become a dark cathedral, and all of humanity awaited its sentence. The persistent cold and lack of direct sunlight caused a catastrophic and simultaneous failure of harvests across the northern hemisphere. This triggered one of the most severe and widespread famines of the entire Middle Ages. Transport yourself now to the heart of that despair. Feel the texture of the wheat in the fields of Europe. It is not golden and firm, but black and limp, rotted on the stalk by a moisture that never ceases and a sun that never warms. See the rice terraces in Japan, where the plants, stunted by the cold, fail to produce grain. Hear the sounds of famine, the silence in the markets, where the stalls are empty and there is nothing to sell. The sharp, constant crying of children, a sound that pierces the soul. The dull rumble of empty stomachs in your own home, a constant reminder of the death that lurks. Look around you. People are chewing the inedible. Shoe leather boiled into a gelatinous pulp. Bitter roots dug up from the forest. Tree bark torn off with fingernails. Anything to trick the hunger, to survive one more day. Modern science has confirmed the magnitude of this agricultural catastrophe. By studying tree rings from that period, dendrochronologists have discovered that they show almost no growth between 1258 and 1259. The trees, like the crops, were barely surviving in abnormally cold and sunless summers. Archaeology tells the same story, but in an even starker way. In 2011, during construction work in London, a massive burial pit was discovered. It contained thousands of skeletons, piled up without ceremony. Analysis revealed they dated precisely to 1258, and the bones showed unequivocal signs of severe malnutrition and hunger-related diseases. They were the silent victims of Samalis. In the face of extreme hunger, the fabric of society began to disintegrate. Charity, community, the bonds of neighborhood, all crumbled before the animalistic desperation to survive. Food theft became commonplace. Violent riots erupted over a handful of grain, and the darkest stories emerged. Whispered tales of cannibalism, of travelers disappearing on the roads, of neighbors locking themselves in their homes with a terrifying fear of other human beings. The famine not only emptied stomachs, it emptied people of their own humanity, leaving only the instinct for survival. The world without a sun was a world without mercy, but the chaos was not the same for everyone. The same catastrophe that plunged agrarian Europe into misery may have been an opportunity for others. The volcanic winter did not just redraw the climate. It may have also redrawn the map of power. While the feudal kingdoms of Europe, dependent on their fixed harvests, were paralyzed by famine, the Mongol Empire was a different entity. Its power was based on mobility. They were nomadic pastoralists and warriors, accustomed to harsh climates and capable of moving their vast herds and armies in search of better pastures or new territories to conquer. It is possible that the climate crisis, which weakened their sedentary enemies, indirectly strengthened their position. And this is where the story becomes even more complex. In 1258, at the very height of the global climate crisis, one of the most momentous events of the 13th century occurred. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, commanding a colossal Mongol army, arrived at the gates of Baghdad. The city was not just the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, it was the intellectual and cultural heart of the Islamic world, a metropolis of libraries, observatories, and palaces, the center of the Golden Age. The fall of Baghdad in February 1258 was brutal and catastrophic. The city was sacked, its inhabitants massacred, and its great library, which housed countless works of science and philosophy, was destroyed. Chroniclers say the waters of the Tigris River ran black with the ink of discarded books and red with the blood of scholars. For many historians, this event marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The question we must ask is, did Samalis play a role in this tragedy? Did the social instability and likely food shortages in the Middle East caused by the climate change weaken Baghdad's defense? Was the chaos caused by the volcano the opportunity the Mongols seized to deliver the final blow to an already declining empire? We cannot know for certain, but it is a fascinating counterpoint. The same cloud of sulfur that brought death and starvation to a farmer in France may have facilitated the conquest that wiped the most brilliant city in the world off the map. Catastrophe, sometimes, is just a matter of perspective. Bodies weakened by hunger became the perfect breeding ground for disease. Famine was closely followed by waves of deadly epidemics that swept through a defenseless population. You are now in a medieval city in the year 1259. The air, already foul with dampness and cold, now has a new smell. It is the sour, sweetish stench of sickness and death, a scent that clings to your clothes and your soul. You hear a sound that never stops, the tolling of church bells. They are not ringing for celebration or for prayer. They toll for the dead, again and again, marking the relentless rhythm of a mortality that has become mundane. You see the death carts rattling through the cobbled streets. Men with covered faces pile up emaciated bodies, regardless of whether they were rich or poor. Death, brought by fever or dysentery, had become the great equalizer. But the most terrible thing is the fear of contact, of a neighbor's breath, of the touch of a loved one. Sickness isolates people, severing the last family and community bonds that famine had left intact. People die alone, locked in their homes, feared by the very ones who once loved them. The medical connection is brutally simple. Severe malnutrition destroys the immune system. The body's defenses collapse. Illnesses that in normal times might not be lethal for a healthy adult, such as influenza, pneumonia, or intestinal infections, became swift death sentences. This was not the Black Death. That would arrive nearly a century later. But this continent-wide health crisis was a terrifying dress rehearsal. It weakened the European population for a generation, leaving it demographically and genetically more vulnerable. One could argue that the shadow of Somalis helped prepare the ground for the great plague that was to come, and with death came doubt. A profound crisis of faith spread throughout Christendom. People had prayed, they had fasted, they had flagellated themselves, they had begged God and all the saints for the sun to return, for the crops to grow, for the sickness to stop, but their prayers went unanswered. If prayers were useless, where was God? Was he punishing humanity, or had he simply abandoned it? The authority of the church and the feudal lords, unable to offer solutions, comfort, or even a coherent explanation, began to erode. People started to question the established order of the world. Amid the suffering, unnoticed by anyone, the seeds of profound social change were being sown. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the veil began to lift. After years suspended in the stratosphere, the sulfate aerosols finally fell. The climate began to stabilize. The world that emerged from the gloom was not the same. The ashes of Somalis had sown the seeds of lasting change. Imagine the scene. It is the year 1260 or 1261. A farmer, a survivor, returns to a field that has been abandoned for years. Weeds cover everything. With an effort that feels superhuman, he drives his plow into the earth. It is an act of faith, a gamble on the future in a world that nearly lost it. For the first time in years, you feel a ray of warm, direct sunlight on your skin. It is not the pale, sickly light of before, but a warmth that comforts, that promises life. It is an almost forgotten sensation, a daily miracle that now seems extraordinary. But around you, the landscape is a testament to loss. Entire villages are empty, their stone and wood houses now silent monuments to the families who did not make it. The world is quieter, emptier. The wound is visible everywhere. The long-term consequences were profound and transformative. The massive depopulation, which in some regions of England reached 20%, completely changed the power dynamics. With fewer peasants to work the land, the value of their labor increased. The serfs who survived found themselves in an unexpected bargaining position with their lords. It was the beginning of the end of the classic feudal system, the economic crisis, the loss of faith in traditional institutions like the church and the nobility, and the collective trauma accelerated changes that would define the end of the High Middle Ages and the dawn of a new era. The event of 1257 was not just a catastrophe, it was a historical bottleneck that filtered humanity, forced it to adapt, and pushed it, at a terrible cost, toward modernity. The story of Samalas is the chronicle of a forgotten catastrophe, erased from popular memory for almost 800 years, yet inscribed forever in the ice of the poles, in the rings of trees, and in the bones of its countless victims. It is the ultimate testament to the fragility of our civilization, a reminder that we live always on the edge of darkness, under the shadow of forces we cannot control. Imagine for one last moment a child born in 1258 in London or Paris. For the first years of his life, his only sky has been a gray, opaque ceiling. Then one day, when he is 3 or 4 years old, the veil finally tears. For the first time, he sees a deep blue sky. For the first time, he feels the real warmth of the sun on his face. For him, this is not a return to normal. It is a miracle, a new and dazzling world emerging from the shadows of an apocalypse he never understood. The story of Samalas is a brutal reminder of our interconnectedness. A mountain exploding on one side of the world can starve a farmer on the other. It teaches us that our civilization, in any century, is built upon a thin layer of climatic stability, and that nature does not need our provocation to remind us who holds the true power. Do you think our modern civilization, with all its technology and science, would be any more prepared for such an event today? Or would our complex global interconnectedness make us even more vulnerable? Leave your opinion in the comments. If this journey shook you, subscribe to Chronicles of Steel. Here, we don't just tell history, we relive it.